The year was 1582, and in the heart of Beijing's Forbidden City, a man lay dying, not in battle, not by the sword, but by the slow, creeping poison of power. Zhang He, the Grand Secretary of the Ming Empire, had been the true ruler of China for a decade, the puppet master behind the throne. His enemies called him a tyrant, his allies called him a genius. And now, as his breath grew shallow, he clutched a single sheet of paper, a letter that could unravel the dynasty. But before the wax seal could be broken, before the words could be read aloud to the emperor, the candle flickered out. The letter disappeared into the night. For nearly 3 centuries, the Ming Dynasty stood as a colossus, a realm of dazzling artistry, ruthless politics, and world-changing innovation. But its brilliance was shadowed by treachery, its glory stained by blood. This is the story of how a single empire rose from the ashes of rebellion, reached unimaginable heights, and then collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. During the year 1344, famine stalked the land. In a dirt-poor village in Anhui province, a teenage boy named Zhu Yuanzhang watched helplessly as his entire family, father, mother, eldest brother, succumbed to starvation within weeks of each other. With no money for burial, he wrapped their bloated bodies in straw mats and begged a local landowner for a scrap of earth to lay them to rest. When the landlord refused, Zhu carried his father's corpse on his back for miles before finding a shallow grave. This moment of unimaginable humiliation would forge the most ruthless ruler China had ever known. At 16, with nothing but a wooden bowl and tattered robes, Zhu became a wandering Buddhist monk, not out of piety, but survival. For years, he begged through a kingdom crumbling under Mongol misrule, witnessing firsthand how the Yuan dynasty's corruption left peasants to eat bark while officials gorged on delicacies. Then in 1352, rebel armies rose across the Yangtze Valley, and Zhu made his choice. He burned down the monastery that sheltered him and joined the Red Turban Rebellion. What followed was a masterclass in ambition. The illiterate monk taught himself military strategy by interrogating captured scholars. He married a rebel commander's daughter, turning the alliance into a springboard for power. And when rival warlords underestimated the beggar king, they learned his 3 unshakable principles: reward loyalty lavishly, punish betrayal mercilessly, and never ever let sentiment cloud judgment. By 1367, Zhu had outmaneuvered or slaughtered every competitor. As his armies closed in on the Yuan capital, the Yongle Emperor fled north without a fight, abandoning the throne he'd held for less than a century. On January 23, 1368, beneath a sky streaked with winter clouds, Zhu Yuanzhang proclaimed himself the Yongle Emperor, vastly martial, and declared the dawn of the Great Ming. But the peasant who became emperor never forgot the stench of his parents' unburied corpses. His reign would be one of paradoxes, rebuilding China's infrastructure while executing 30,000 officials in anti-corruption purges, promoting Confucian ideals while personally torturing suspects in palace dungeons. The boy who starved now demanded absolute control over every grain of rice in the empire. For in Zhu's mind, the Ming would never fall, because he would root out weakness before it could take hold, even if it meant bathing the Forbidden City's foundations in blood. The same ruthless pragmatism that built the Ming Dynasty now demanded a capital worthy of its ambition. Zhu Yuanzhang's son, the Yongle Emperor, looked north from Nanjing in 1406 and envisioned a fortress palace that would dwarf all others, not just in splendor, but in its very capacity to control. What emerged from 14 years of backbreaking labor was more than an imperial residence. It was the physical manifestation of Ming power, designed to awe subjects and intimidate rivals in equal measure. Every detail of the Forbidden City served as both weapon and warning. The 33-foot walls weren't merely defensive. Their sheer height ensured no outsider could glimpse the sacred rituals within, while their blood-red color symbolized the fate awaiting those who challenged imperial authority. The 3-tiered marble platforms of the great halls forced approaching officials to ascend in increasingly humbled postures, their journey mirroring the emperor's cosmic ascent to the heavenly mandate. Even the golden roof tiles, precisely 9,999 of them, carried mathematical menace, stopping one short of the 10,000 reserved for heaven itself. Beneath this glittering surface pulsed the palace's true nervous system, a shadow empire of eunuchs who moved through hidden corridors like blood through veins. These castrated administrators controlled access to the emperor while maintaining their own parallel government, their influence waxing and waning with each imperial whim. The notorious Wang Zhen, first powerful eunuch of the Ming, would meet his end buried alive by Mongol warriors, but not before proving how a servant could eclipse his master, leading the Zheng Emperor into catastrophic defeat at Tumu Fortress. The palace's architecture enforced isolation as deliberately as any prison. Concubines in the secluded inner courts perfected arts of intrigue, their painted nails dipping into politics as readily as into poison wine. When the Zheng Emperor survived an assassination attempt by his own concubines in 1542, the subsequent purge erased not just the perpetrators, but every servant who might have witnessed the humiliation, a lesson written in blood about the price of imperial vulnerability. Most telling of all were the ice houses beneath the palace floors. While these ingenious refrigerators preserved summer delicacies for imperial banquets, they also served as temporary tombs for disgraced officials. Their frozen bodies kept in limbo until the emperor decided between posthumous pardon or the final indignity of dismemberment. Here in these subterranean chambers lay the unspoken truth of Ming rule. Even in death, no subject escaped the emperor's judgment. From its vermilion gates to its mercury-lined vaults, the Forbidden City stood as the ultimate expression of Zhu Yuanzhang's legacy, a monument to control so absolute it sought to govern not just men's actions, but their very thoughts. The peasant emperor who rose from starvation now ruled from a palace where even the bricks bore the names of their makers, ensuring every craftsman's family could be held accountable should his work prove imperfect. In this city within a city, paranoia and power became inseparable twins, their dance continuing long after the Ming themselves had faded into history. Even as the Forbidden City's walls echoed with whispered conspiracies, beyond its gates unfolded one of history's most dazzling cultural renaissances. The Yongle Emperor's ambitious spirit didn't stop at architecture. It ignited an explosion of creativity that would make Ming China the envy of the world. In the kilns of Jingdezhen, artisans achieved what no civilization had before. Porcelain so flawless it rang like jade when struck. Their cobalt blue designs, inspired by Persian pigments brought along the Silk Road, became the dynasty's signature aesthetic. But this was more than art. It was economic warfare. When Ming vessels reached Europe, they sparked a craze so violent that German princes traded regiments of soldiers for single vases, and Portuguese merchants lied about shipwrecks to explain shortages to desperate royalty. The secret? A clay recipe guarded like state secrets, using kaolin mined from Jialing Mountain, the bones of the earth that gave porcelain its ghostly translucence. Meanwhile, in Suzhou's water gardens, scholars reinvented what it meant to be Chinese. The Wenren, literati gentlemen, turned calligraphy into performance art, their brushstrokes capturing not just words but the very key of the universe. Tang Yin, the dynasty's most famous painter, lived as both genius and scandal. His erotic album leaves shocked the court even as they commanded astronomical prices. This cultural ferment birthed the novel too. Wu Cheng'en's journey to the West took oral folktales and transformed them into epic literature, creating the mischievous Monkey King who still charms readers today. But the Ming's most breathtaking ambition unfolded on the high seas. Between 1405 and 1433, Admiral Zheng He's treasure fleets, some ships stretching 400 feet, made 7 voyages reaching from Java to Arabia to Africa. These weren't mere trading missions, but floating embassies of soft power. Zheng's crews returned with giraffes, believed to be mythical Qilin, blocks of African ebony, and envoys from 30 kingdoms. A single voyage could carry 28,000 men, doctors, cartographers, even meteorologists tracking monsoons with unprecedented precision. The tragedy? This golden age carried the seeds of its own demise. In 1436, the same court astrologers who designed the Forbidden City convinced the emperor that silver, not exploration, would secure China's future. Zheng He's logs were burned, his shipyards abandoned. As Portugal's caravels began venturing down Africa's coast, Ming China turned inward. its artists still painting masterpieces, its kilns still firing perfection, but its gaze no longer on the horizon. The choice would echo through centuries, the moment the dragon chose the cage of tradition over the tempest of the unknown. As the last Ming porcelain vases were being loaded onto Portuguese carracks bound for Europe, few noticed how the dynasty that had created these masterpieces was crumbling like an overfired ceramic. The same kilns of Zheng He that had perfected cobalt blue glazes now stood cold, their artisans conscripted into desperate militias. The imperial examination still produced elegant scholars who could compose poetry in perfect calligraphy, but their classical verses couldn't stop the rebel armies massing outside provincial cities. The unraveling began with whispers in the corridors of power. Eunuchs, those emasculated guardians of imperial tradition, had grown fat on silver smuggled past tax collectors. In the countryside, the weather itself seemed to rebel. Crops failed year after year as the Little Ice Age tightened its grip, while locust swarms descended like living curtains upon the starving provinces. The emperor's astronomers, those keepers of the celestial mandate, recorded ominous portents in their star charts. Comets with tails like executioner's blades, planets aligning in configurations not seen since the fall of the Tang dynasty. Then came Li Zicheng, the dashing prince who had been a lowly postal clerk before the government stopped paying his wages. His rebel army swelled with every starving village they passed, their ranks filled with peasants wielding farming tools turned weapons. They moved like a flood across the North China Plain, and when they finally reached Beijing's towering walls in 1644, they found the city gates mysteriously unguarded. Later, historians would debate whether this was betrayal or bureaucratic collapse, the final failure of a system that had once governed 100 million people with ruthless efficiency. Inside the Forbidden City, the Yongle Emperor became both tragic actor and audience to his dynasty's final act. As the sounds of rebellion echoed through the Vermilion corridors, he took up his sword to personally kill his concubines and daughters, a mercy compared to what Li Zicheng's men would do. His last walk to Mission Hill was made alone, his imperial retinue having fled like rats from a sinking ship. The locust tree he chose for his hanging still stands today, its gnarled branches a living monument to imperial despair. But history, ever cruel, had reserved its greatest irony for after the emperor's death. Wu Songui, the Ming's last loyal general guarding Shanhai Pass, made his fateful decision not for country or honor, but for love. When he received word that Li Zicheng had taken his beloved concubine Shen Yuanyuan, the woman immortalized in later operas as the most beautiful of her age, he opened the Great Wall's gates to the Manchu hordes. The Qing cavalry poured through like a silver tide, their composite bows singing as they cut down both rebels and loyalists alike. In the south, the last Ming princes established exile courts that flickered briefly before being extinguished. One by one they fell, some drowning themselves in the Pearl River like their ancestor had in Nanjing. Others captured and executed with the ritual slow slicing reserved for traitors. The final claimant to the Ming throne, the Yongle Emperor, would spend his last years as a fugitive in the jungles of Burma, his court reduced to a handful of starving officials, still debating Confucian classics as the noose tightened. Today, when visitors admire Ming vases in museum cases or walk the polished stones of the Forbidden City, they're witnessing the afterlife of a civilization that once bestrode the world. The porcelain endures, the architecture remains, but the lesson whispers through the centuries that even the most brilliant golden age carries within it the seeds of its own destruction, and that no wall, however mighty, can forever keep out the consequences of neglect. The Ming didn't fall to a superior force, but to its own accumulated failures. 1,000 small cracks in the glaze that finally shattered the entire vessel. 3 centuries after its collapse, the Ming Dynasty's fingerprints remain etched into modern civilization. Yet its greatest lessons are those we're still struggling to learn. This was an empire that simultaneously pioneered globalization and isolationism, artistic liberation and brutal repression, technological brilliance and catastrophic short-sightedness. The porcelain that once bankrupted European aristocrats now sits in museum vitrines, but its true legacy is far more profound. Ming ceramic techniques revolutionized material science, with modern engineers still studying Zheng He kilns to develop advanced ceramics for spacecraft heat shields. Those same blue and white patterns now decorate everything from London tea shops to Tokyo subway tiles. Aesthetic colonialism in reverse, where the colonized culture's art conquered its conquerors. Zheng He's abandoned voyages haunt our geopolitical imagination. Historians calculate that had China maintained its naval dominance, the age of exploration might have been an Asian-led enterprise, potentially altering everything from the slave trade to the distribution of global languages. Instead, the Ming retreat created the power vacuum Portugal and Spain would fill, a cautionary tale about the cost of turning inward that resonates in today's debates over globalization. The dynasty's bureaucratic innovations, standardized testing, centralized grain reserves, nationwide census taking, became templates for modern governance. Yet its fatal weaknesses, corruption, inflexibility, the disconnect between rulers and ruled, read like a checklist of how empires fail. When Beijing's Ming-era weather data helped 21st century climatologists track the Little Ice Age, researchers made an unsettling discovery. The dynasty's collapse lines up precisely with climate change patterns we face today. Most haunting is the psychological legacy. The Forbidden City's architecture of control finds echoes in everything from Washington's National Mall to Pyongyang's government complexes. The Ming practice of rewriting history survives in modern information wars. Even Zhu Yuanzhang's paranoia has its descendants in surveillance states that justify extreme measures as necessary for stability. Perhaps the Ming's ultimate paradox is this: an empire so obsessed with controlling its narrative now serves as a mirror for every society wrestling with the same tensions between openness and control, innovation and tradition, power and responsibility. Its blue and white porcelain endures as a metaphor for the dynasty itself, beautiful, fragile, and revealing its truest colors only when held up to the light of history. The last word belongs to a Ming-era proverb found scribbled in the margin of a 16th century scholar's notebook. Dragons rise from the same earth they will one day crumble into. 300 years of glory reduced to a handful of artifacts and this eternal truth. No empire, however magnificent, escapes the relentless turning of heaven's wheel. The Ming Dynasty's story does not end with its collapse in 1644. It merely changes form. Like the reverberations of a temple bell, its influence continues to resonate across centuries, shaping not just China, but the world. It was an empire of dazzling contradictions. Brilliant yet brutal, progressive yet paranoid, expansive yet isolationist. And in those contradictions, we find timeless lessons about power, culture, and the fragility of greatness. Today, the Forbidden City stands as a monument to the Ming's ambition, its vermilion walls now trod by tourists rather than eunuchs. The porcelain that once symbolized imperial prestige has become global heritage, its cobalt hues replicated in factories from Delft to Dubai. Zheng He's voyages, once erased from history, are now celebrated as a lost chapter of globalization, inspiring everything from diplomatic strategies to best-selling novels. But the Ming's true legacy is not in its artifacts. It's in the questions it forces us to ask. What does it mean to lead in a changing world? How does a society balance tradition with innovation? When does strength become rigidity, and when does caution become decline? The Ming's answers to these questions brought them glory, and ultimately ruin. As modern nations grapple with climate crises, geopolitical rivalries, and cultural evolution, the Ming Dynasty whispers across the ages. Empires are not undone by external enemies alone, but by the slow erosion of vision, the corruption of systems, and the failure to adapt. The last Ming emperor's final act, hanging himself as his capital burned, was not just an ending, but a warning. For all its splendor, no dynasty lasts forever. Yet in its artifacts, its stories, and its hard-won lessons, the Ming endures. Not as a lost golden age, but as a mirror held up to all who wield power, reminding us that history's greatest empires are those that learn from the past rather than repeat it. And so the Ming story closes where it began, with a single man's ambition, a nation's resilience, and the understanding that even the grandest dynasties are, in the end, only human.